Welcome back to the deep dive. This is the place where we take complex, often really dense research, and we pull out the most actionable knowledge you need to get informed fast.
And our mission, as always, is to give you not just the facts, but really the biological architecture behind them.
Today, we are diving deep into something that, well, it really makes up the foundation of our daily lives: habits.
It's so true. If you want to change your life, you don't actually have to reinvent the wheel. You just need to update your own operating system.
Yeah.
And that system, that's your habitual behavior.
And the scale of this is, frankly, striking. It really underscores why this is such a critical deep dive for anyone really who's looking for self-improvement or just better productivity.
Well, when researchers actually tally up all the decisions, all the actions we take in a day,
Yeah.
the estimates show that up to, and this is wild, up to 70% of our waking behavior is dictated by habits.
70%.
Yeah, man.
That's huge.
Think about that. 7 out of every 10 minutes you're awake, you're likely running on autopilot. Just patterns that were established a long, long time ago in your nervous system.
So if those patterns are positive, you've got this massive tailwind pushing you forward.
Exactly. But if they're maladaptive, you are constantly fighting against the grain. It's an uphill battle every single day.
Which means we're not just talking about, psychological tricks or willpower. We're talking about changing the actual hardware of your body. We're talking about neuroplasticity.
That's the word. Neuroplasticity is the process where the nervous system physically changes its structure, its function, its connections, all in a response to experience.
So in simpler terms, every time you successfully do something new, you are physically building and strengthening a new neural circuit.
Literally, it's the classic neurons that fire together, wire together. You're carving a new path in your brain.
So we're taking this conversation away from these abstract ideas like just try harder, and we're anchoring it firmly in biology, where it belongs.
That is absolutely the goal. So our deep dive today is going to cover 4 key areas. First, we'll define the architecture of habits, and we'll introduce a really critical metric for measuring effort.
Okay.
Then we'll give you 2 really potent, neurobiologically grounded tools for just getting started.
Good. The initiation is always the hardest part.
Then we'll lay out a comprehensive 24-hour system for scheduling your habits based on your body's natural neurochemistry.
And finally,
Finally, we'll get into a really counterintuitive but highly effective strategy for breaking those stubborn, deeply embedded bad habits.
okay, let's start with the low-hanging fruit of misinformation. If you've ever read a self-help book, you've probably heard some kind of magic number.
Oh, yeah.
It takes 18 days or 21 days or 30 days to form a habit. It's a very comforting idea, but I suspect it's largely a myth that just sets people up to fail.
It's more of a marketing slogan than a scientific reality,
Mm-hmm.
While those numbers might represent an average for a very specific, very simple behavior in a lab,
Right.
they completely fail to capture the vast scientific reality of individual variability.
And you're pointing to some really important research here. Let's get specific about the data that just blows this hard and fast rule out of the water.
Well, we should look at the peer-reviewed work from 2010 by Lai and their colleagues. This study tracked people trying to form the exact same new habit.
And the results were
Staggering. For different people trying to do the same thing, something as simple as drinking a glass of water after breakfast, the time it took to become automatic ranged from 18 days on the fast end to a remarkable 254 days on the slow end.
Wow, 254 days. That's nearly 9 months.
9 months.
So if you're struggling at day 30, thinking you failed because you didn't hit that, arbitrary 21-day mark, you're just not respecting the biological range of human change.
Precisely. And that extreme variability is the first crucial insight for anyone listening. Struggling with one habit does not mean you'll struggle with others.
So you're not a failure.
You are not a failure. You might take 200 days to get a meditation habit down, but only 20 days to start flossing. You're just operating within the normal, massive biological range of neuroplasticity.
Okay, so if the time is so variable, what's the metric we should actually be tracking? How do we measure the effort, that internal struggle?
This brings us to a concept that's a fantastic functional metric. Let's call it limbic friction, or LF for short.
Limbic friction. I like that. So this isn't a formal term from a textbook. It's more of a useful shorthand.
Exactly. It's a mental construct,
Yeah.
a way to describe the strain, the cognitive load, or just the pure activation energy you need to overcome that internal resistance to do something.
I know that feeling all too well. It's that internal drag when you know you should do something, but your body is just resisting.
That's it. And LF specifically describes the effort needed to overcome two incompatible internal states.
Right, and what are those two states we're always fighting against?
They're really the two extremes of our internal activation spectrum. They're governed by our autonomic nervous system. So state number one is a state of anxiousness or being too wired. This is when you're highly alert, maybe stressed, buzzing with nervous energy.
Yeah.
But you need to perform a calming or a deeply focused activity, like sitting down a journal or doing 2 hours of deep work.
So your engine is just running way too fast for the task at hand. You've got the energy, but it's all misdirected chaos.
Exactly. And the second opposing state is being tired, lazy, or just profoundly unmotivated.
The other side of the coin.
Right. You might feel calm, but that calmness is lethargy. It's exhaustion.
Yeah.
And you just cannot muster the internal energy to start something like a high-intensity workout.
That feels like the engine won't even turn over. So limbic friction is the measure of how much effort it takes to get from the state you are in to the state you need to be in.
Yes. And this is all underpinned by the autonomic nervous system seesaw. It's constantly balancing the sympathetic system, that's fight or flight, alertness, with the parasympathetic system, which is rest and digest, calm.
So LF is basically a measurement of how much energy it takes to force yourself into action when your ANS is pushing you in the opposite direction.
Perfect summary.
So as a listener, how do I actually use this? I mean, since it's not a number I can get from a machine, how do I make sure I'm not just using LF as another piece of jargon?
It's a critical point. You use it as a subjective tracking tool, maybe a simple 1 to 10 scale.
Okay.
If you notice a new habit is consistently an 8, 9, or 10 on your personal LF scale, I mean, it feels like pulling teeth to start it every single day, then you have your own data.
Right.
You have evidence that this habit is going to be extremely challenging, and it's going to require some real strategic intervention, the kind of tools and scheduling we're going to talk about later.
So high LF means apply maximum strategy. Low LF means the habit is already kind of fitting into my life pretty naturally.
Correct. By tracking your own perceived LF, you stop fighting these internal forces blindly. You gain a predictive edge. You can see, okay, this high LF habit needs to be scheduled carefully, while a low LF one can be slotted in more flexibly.
All right, so we understand the variability of time, and we have this metric for internal resistance, LF. Now let's get into how habits are actually structured. I know in the literature, there are two main categories that help us understand our motivation.
And this distinction is vital. I mean, it's absolutely critical for long-term adherence. So first we have what you could call immediate goal-based habits.
Okay, give us an example of that.
These are laser-focused on a specific, measurable, immediate outcome. For instance, setting a goal to complete a Zone 2 cardio session 4 times a week for exactly 45 minutes.
Right?
The satisfaction, the reward, is just checking that box. The goal is satisfied the second you finish. It's very transactional.
And then we move to what seems to be the far more powerful category, the identity-based habits.
This is where the behavior really transcends that simple transaction. You're linking the activity to a larger, overarching self-concept or identity.
So it's not just about doing the cardio session.
No, it's about doing it because you're becoming a fit person, or a consistent writer, or an early riser. The habit reinforces the identity you're building, and that identity provides the intrinsic fuel for the habit.
That shift from, I have to do this, to, I am the type of person who does this, that seems to make the behavior so much stickier. The motivation becomes internal, not external.
Precisely. Once you internalize that identity, failing to perform the habit feels like you're contradicting your own self-concept. And that provides a much more powerful resistance to quitting than just failing to check a box.
So to maximize this effect, you suggest we identify what are called linchpin habits. Let's really unpack this idea.
A linchpin is the one crucial element that holds a whole system together. So linchpin habits are behaviors that, when you do them, they trigger a positive cascade of other beneficial habits. They make everything that comes after them easier to do, almost automatic.
Okay, so here's where I have to push back a little. If the goal is to make hard habits easier, and your crucial rule for picking a linchpin habit is that it must be something you already enjoy doing, isn't that a contradiction? Isn't the point of a system like this to get us to do the things we don't enjoy?
That is an excellent and really necessary question.
Yeah.
The power isn't in the linchpin itself being hard. The power is in the neurochemical bias it creates for everything that follows.
Okay.
If the linchpin is not enjoyable, if it's a high LF activity for you, you'll fail to do it reliably. And if you don't do the linchpin, the cascade never even starts.
So we're using an existing affinity, something we already like, to bootstrap adjacent, harder behaviors.
Exactly. When you do a pleasurable activity, especially something like physical exercise,
Yeah.
you get this immediate spike in certain neurochemicals, dopamine, norepinephrine, endorphins. You're already in a state of high activation and positive momentum.
Right.
By intentionally placing that enjoyable linchpin first, you're leveraging that positive self-generated chemical state to lower the LF of the 4 or 5 harder habits that come after it.
Well, let's use a detailed example. For me, my pleasurable linchpin is resistance training and a short run, done right after I wake up.
Okay, walk us through the cascade that follows that, and focus specifically on the internal shift it creates.
Well, the physical output guarantees I've spent energy. So later that night, my sleep pressure is high, which almost guarantees better rest. That's habit 2.
Makes sense.
And because I've trained, I'm just inherently thirstier and more mindful of recovery, so I prioritize hydration all day. That's habit 3.
Okay.
And critically, because I just invested all that physical effort, I reflexively avoid choices that would sabotage it, like ordering heavy, unhealthy fast food for lunch. The decision to eat healthy just becomes automatic. That's habit 4.
You see, the enjoyment of the linchpin made the subsequent hard choices, which might have previously been high LF, feel low LF. You use one single enjoyable behavior to positively bias your entire behavioral chain for the rest of the day.
So once we have these habits established, goal-based, identity-based linchpins, how do we actually know if they're truly sticking? How do we measure habit strength?
We can use 2 really clear criteria for that. Criterion number 1 is context dependence,
Meaning,
meaning how likely is the habit to happen regardless of your environment. If you can only meditate when you're in that specific quiet corner of your house, the habit is context dependent. It's weak.
but if I can do my morning routine in a hotel room in a strange city, or even when I'm sick or traveling internationally, then it's strong. It's achieved context independence.
Precisely. And criterion number 2 is the required limbic friction. This goes right back to our metric. How much activation energy does it take to do it regularly? If you still have to fight tooth and nail every day, the habit is just shallowly embedded.
And the ultimate goal is for the habit to require almost zero LF.
And when that LF approaches 0 and the context dependence disappears, we achieve.
Automaticity.
That's the ultimate stage. The neural circuits just fire on their own. The action starts with minimal or even 0 conscious thought. It's often driven by the context itself, like walking into the bathroom triggers teeth brushing, rather than a conscious decision. This deep embedding means the habit has become part of your background operating system.
Okay, we've established that even low LF habits need a bit of a push to get started, and high LF habits need a full-on strategic attack. Since willpower is, a finite resource, how do we use simple, practical tools to kind of cheat that initial threshold and lower the limbic friction right out of the gate?
Our first tool comes from research on the psychology of habit. Specifically, it focuses on how the brain registers and stores ancient sequences. We can call this procedural memory visualization, or, more simply, mental rehearsal.
This sounds almost too simple to be effective. What's the neural basis for this? Why does just thinking about it work?
The mechanism relies on what's called procedural memory. That's the part of your memory that holds the sequential steps for a skill. Now, every physical repetition causes small structural changes in the brain, but we now know that mental rehearsal does a similar preliminary job.
So how do we do this properly? Do I just think, I should exercise later? Is that enough?
No, the key is specificity and sequential rehearsal.
Huh.
You have to sit down, literally, just for a minute or two, and mentally step through the entire sequence of the habit from start to finish.
The whole thing.
The whole thing. If your new habit is preparing a healthy lunch, you visualize walking to the fridge, taking out the containers, chopping the specific vegetables, packing the specific ingredients, putting it into the bag, and placing that bag by the door. Every single small detail.
Why does that mental run-through matter so much? What's it actually doing in the brain?
It's all about priming the system. This simple mental exercise sets the necessary neurons in motion that you'll need for the physical execution later. It's like installing the software before you run the program.
Ah.
So when you physically show up to do the habit, the execution threshold is lower because the neural pathways for that sequence are already partially activated. The brain thinks, wait, I've done this before, and the activation energy needed, the LF drops significantly. The dominoes just fall more easily.
That is such an elegant way to reduce LF without burning any physical energy or willpower. It's so efficient.
It is. Now let's talk about what the literature often points to as the most critical tool for cementing that context independence we talked about, and that is task bracketing.
This technique is rooted deep in the brain structure, isn't it? Specifically within the basal ganglia, and even more specifically, the dorsolateral striatum. Why is that one region so crucial for turning conscious actions into reflexes?
The basal ganglia, and particularly the dorsolateral striatum, acts as the brain's internal switchboard operator for routine behavior. It governs the go signal for action and the no-go signal for suppression. Its activity is essential for creating these clean, dedicated circuits for our routines.
And what studies show about this region's activity during a habit is key to understanding this bracket idea.
That's right. High-resolution studies show that neural activity in the dorsolateral striatum peaks intensely at two very specific times.
When?
At the very beginning of a habit's execution, the initiation cue, and at the very end of it, the completion signal. It creates a neural bracket around the entire behavior, segmenting it as a discrete, necessary action loop.
So it's the brain's way of putting a bookmark on the start and a bookmark on the finish. It's the neural fingerprint of this whole sequence has to happen and then it is complete.
Exactly. And this bracketing mechanism is what underlies a habit's strength and its ability to become context independent. It creates a really robust neural imprint that shifts your whole nervous system toward execution readiness, no matter the external circumstances.
That's why when you wake up, even if you're stressed or had a terrible night's sleep, the cue of just walking into the bathroom triggers the bracketing sequence for brushing your teeth, and the action just happens.
It happens reflexively.
So to fully leverage this bracketing, we have to tackle the scheduling problem. We've all been told to be precise. I will meditate at 7 a.m. sharp. But the source material suggests this time-based scheduling is really only good for the short term.
It works for the short term because schedules are rigid, but they fail long term because life is chaotic. Long-term habit consolidation relies not on a rigid clock face, but on your state.
State, not time.
Right. Your nervous system generates specific behaviors based on your current neurochemical state, your level of activation, your focus, your energy.
So the argument is that task bracketing should be anchored to the body's internal neurochemical states, these phases of the day, rather than to a specific time on the clock.
Absolutely. Anchoring habits to a time, like 7:00 a.m., ties them to an extrinsic context. But anchoring them to a state, like during my period of highest natural dopamine, allows the habit to migrate successfully across different contexts and environments. That's what fosters true strength and automaticity.
This transition leads us perfectly into the 24-hour phase system, which is really the operational blueprint for maximizing habit success. If we're anchoring to state, we need to know what those states are.
Right, and the core principle is dividing the 24-hour cycle into three distinct phases based on these predictable shifts in our neurochemical signatures.
This strategic placement of habits, according to their required limbic friction, is what separates the novices from the mastery-level performers.
You stop fighting your biology and you start leveraging it.
Okay, let's break down phase one. This is the period of maximum leverage for high-effort tasks.
Phase one runs from 0 hours to approximately 8 hours after waking. And crucially, this is regardless of what time you actually wake up.
So what's fueling this high activation period? What's going on chemically?
Your system is naturally primed with high levels of these alerting neurochemicals. We see elevated dopamine, norepinephrine, which is also noradrenaline, and epinephrine, which is adrenaline.
And this is your body's natural action and focus-oriented cocktail, right? Triggered by morning light and our circadian rhythm.
Exactly.
I thought dopamine was just about pleasure. Why is it so important for overcoming resistance?
That's a really common misconception. Dopamine isn't just about the feeling of reward. It's primarily about the anticipation of reward and, critically for this, the motor drive to overcome resistance and pursue effortful tasks. When you have high levels of these chemicals, your nervous system is naturally biased toward action. Your ability to overcome high LF is at its absolute peak.
So the strategic application for phase one is crystal clear. Place the habits that have the highest LF right here.
Precisely. If that grueling resistance training session is always hard to start, or if writing the most complex chapter of your dissertation requires maximum activation, it goes into phase one.
So you're using this natural chemical state to facilitate the performance.
Right. And by performing a high LF task consistently in phase one, you create the most robust task bracketing possible, and you solidify that neural circuit really quickly.
We've used the natural tide of our biology instead of trying to manually paddle against it.
That is the entire strategy. You condition your nervous system to predict that during this specific biological window, no matter what the clock says, you lean in against resistance to do hard things.
Okay, now let's shift into phase 2, the midday transition.
Phase 2 runs roughly from 9 to 14 or 15 hours after waking. This is what we can call the mellow consolidation period.
And the neurochemical landscape is fundamentally changing here, isn't it?
It is. Dopamine, norepinephrine, cortisol, they all naturally start to taper off as your system moves away from that acute morning alertness.
And what's rising to take their place?
Conversely, serotonin starts to rise significantly, and it often peaks during this mid to late afternoon phase.
What kind of state does the serotonergic system promote?
Serotonin lends itself to a calmer, more relaxed, yet still highly alert and present state. It's great for social engagement, general work, tasks that require presence without that intense, often stressful tunnel vision you get in phase 1.
I definitely notice this. If I try to force complex strategic planning late in the afternoon, the cognitive effort feels like 50% higher than it did in the morning.
That is your phase 2 chemistry talking to you. And we can actually support this mellow state by being mindful of our environment. Start capering your exposure to bright artificial light, especially from harsh overhead lights, as evening approaches.
But low solar angle sunlight is okay.
Low solar angle sunlight is fine, even beneficial.
And this is also the perfect time to support the transition to sleep later on.
Exactly. Engaging in some kind of heat exposure, a sauna, a hot bath, a hot shower, tends to support this serotonergic state. And it signals to the nervous system that it's time to downshift.
So phase 2 is not about doing nothing. It's about focusing on habits that require very little override of limbic friction.
Precisely. Focus on those mellower, more contemplative activities. Journaling, practicing a musical instrument, catching up on lower stakes emails, learning a language. These things benefit from a calm, present mind state. They consolidate task formation within a supportive, lower stress chemical environment.
Finally, we reach the end of the day. The non-negotiable period for consolidation phase 3, 16 to 24 hours after waking.
And the goal here is completely passive. It's all about supporting the neuroplasticity that allows the circuits you activated in phases 1 and 2 to solidify.
So the actual rewiring, the hardwiring of the habits, happens in deep sleep.
Yes. If you fail this phase, you undermine everything else you did that day.
What are the hard requirements for optimizing phase 3?
Strict adherence to sleep hygiene. Maintain a dark environment, low or no light is essential. And critically, keep the room temperature low, usually below 68 degrees Fahrenheit, as this is hugely beneficial for getting into and staying in deep sleep.
And what about food and digestion?
Digestion is a very high-energy process that can actively interfere with the restorative rest. So maintaining a gap between your final meal and when you go to sleep, ideally 2 to 4 hours, is highly recommended.
Okay.
If you have a very small, low-carb snack, maybe 90 minutes could suffice for some people.
Right.
But generally, give your body time to transition out of that digestive state.
And what's the most important warning for anyone who tends to wake up in the middle of the night and struggles to get back to sleep?
This is non-negotiable.
Oh,
If you have to get up, you must use the absolute minimum light required for safety.
why is that so important?
Because exposure to bright light, especially the blue light from screens, will immediately and potently inhibit the release of melatonin, which is your primary sleep hormone. Once melatonin is suppressed, it is extremely difficult to fall back asleep, and you actively sabotage the deep sleep cycles you need for that neuroplastic consolidation.
So if I spend phase 1 fighting to do a hard workout, and then I spend phase 3 scrolling through social media under bright lights, I'm basically just hitting delete on all the work I did earlier.
You are. The neural circuits will not consolidate. Habit formation is a 24-hour process, and phase 3 is where the silent, microscopic heavy lifting is done by the brain. You can't rush that.
Okay, now that we have this 24-hour strategic schedule, how do we structure the learning period itself? The research provides a structured 21-day system, which isn't about magically cementing habits in 3 weeks, but more about building the meta skill of consistency.
Right. The system is designed to build a habit of performing habits.
Yeah.
We use 21 days as a placeholder because it tends to be about the average period required to sufficiently engage neuroplasticity and gain some momentum.
So walk us through the structure. How does it work?
You start by selecting 6 new or challenging habits that you commit to performing daily for those 21 days.
And here's the element that I think is revolutionary for people who get caught in that all-or-nothing trap.
Yeah.
The built-in flexibility.
Yes. The expectation is that you will only reliably complete 4 to 5 of those 6 tasks each day. And that's intentional.
It provides crucial permission to fail.
It does. It builds a sense of control, and it reduces the anxiety that failure is this catastrophic event.
But why pick 6 if you only expect to do 4 or 5?
It allows for natural daily variability. Your nervous system is never perfect. One habit, like resistance training, might only be scheduled 4 days a week anyway, so on your recovery days, you only need to hit 5 things to be successful.
So the sixth task just absorbs the inevitable messiness of life, a late meeting, an unexpected crisis.
Exactly. It keeps the whole system from being derailed.
And what if a listener misses a day or only completes 3 tasks because of genuine chaos? What's the rule?
The rule is strictly enforced. No compensation. You have to strictly avoid habit slip compensation, which is trying to punish yourself by doing 8 or 9 tasks the next day.
Why is that so bad?
That compensatory behavior is what leads to burnout and a high limbic friction rebound. It makes you hate the entire process. The goal is consistency and volume management, not making up for past mistakes. You just reset the next day and aim for 4 or 5 again.
So once this 21 days are up, what's the immediate next step?
You immediately stop the deliberate schedule. The following 21 days become the real test. You switch over to autopilot and you assess how many of the original 6 habits were automatically incorporated and became reflexive.
So the next 21 days are a measured testing period for true strength. What should people be wary of here?
The biggest pitfall is adding too much, too soon. You have to exercise restraint. You should only add more habits to your routine once the original 6 have become truly reflexive and context independent.
Right.
Most people try to cram 10 things into their nervous system at once, which guarantees that none of the habits ever reach automaticity.
This sounds like a much more measured, biologically respectful approach to behavior change. It's built on iteration and observation.
It is. And this iterative testing leads us perfectly to the ultimate proof of habit strength, achieving context independence through what we can call migration.
Explain that.
Once a habit requires very low LF, you can test its strength by moving it around in your schedule somewhat randomly. For instance, exercising in the morning one day, the afternoon the next.
And if you can do it equally effortlessly across different times and locations.
That's the proof. It's proof that habit is truly consolidated.
That effortless migration across the schedule is the sign. What's the deep neural mechanism behind this migration?
It involves the brain physically relocating the information early in the learning process, when you're consciously reminding yourself to do the habit. The procedures and memories are maintained in the hippocampus.
That's the brain region for forming new explicit memories.
Right. The hippocampus acts like a kind of temporary storage, like a sticky note on your brain's desktop.
That makes sense.
But once that habit achieves context independence and is truly reflexive, the information has migrated out of the hippocampus into the deeper, more reflexive circuits, primarily the dorsal striatum we talked about earlier.
So it's moved from explicit memory control to automatic motor control.
Think of it like moving information from a temporary sticky note to a permanent engraving in marble.
So when you're exercising at 7 a.m. one day and 4 p.m. the next, and it feels equally effortless and automatic, that's your nervous system announcing, this is wired in. It doesn't rely on contextual cues anymore.
That is the biological confirmation that you have achieved true mastery.
We have spent a lot of time on formation, but what about the equally challenging problem of breaking bad habits? They're so difficult to crack because, by their very nature, they're automatic, they're fast, and they're often executed before we even realize we've made a decision.
That is the core neurological challenge. If you needed 5 seconds of conscious thought before you performed the bad habit, before reaching for that cookie or picking up your phone during focused work, you wouldn't have the bad habit in the first place.
So conscious intervention before the action is often a losing battle.
It often is. So the solution is quite counterintuitive. Instead of fighting the habit beforehand, the key is to intervene immediately following the bad habit execution.
So you let the mistake happen.
You let it happen. The critical strategy is to take the period immediately following the slip-up and instantly insert a positive replacement behavior.
This feels strange. Why that timing? Doesn't following a bad behavior with a positive one accidentally, reinforce the bad one?
It seems like it would, but the neurobiological rationale here is really sound. This technique leverages the fact that the neurons responsible for generating that bad habit were just highly active. They just fired.
Okay.
By immediately linking a positive replacement behavior to the bad one, you create a double habit. You're essentially hijacking the already activated neural circuits to fire a new positive sequence right after.
And the ultimate goal of this linked sequence is to use the bad habit's own energy to destroy it.
Precisely. You are inducing what's called long-term depression, or LTD, in the bad habit pathways.
Okay, break that down.
Think of the bad habit pathway like a deeply rutted, well-used dirt road. By immediately forcing the new positive habit, you're sending heavy traffic down a new paved road that you've just built right next to it.
Right.
Through repetition, that new paved road attracts all the traffic, and the old dirt road starts to erode and eventually closes down entirely from lack of use. That erosion of the old connection, that's long-term depression in action.
This means we don't need that difficult, constant conscious awareness prior to the bad behavior anymore. We just need to commit to the post-slip intervention.
It simplifies the emotional labor so much. You can always identify when you have just done the thing you don't want to do.
Let's run through some specific examples to make this really concrete.
Okay, let's start with a classic. Mindlessly checking social media during focused work.
The productivity killer.
The intervention is, as soon as you realize you've picked up the phone and scrolled for even 5 seconds, you immediately put the phone down and perform 2 minutes of focused, deep breathing. That's your low LF replacement.
Okay, next scenario. The mindless snacking habit. Grabbing a handful of chips every time you walk past the kitchen counter.
The moment you realize you've eaten the chips, you immediately stop, walk away from the counter, and engage in the low LF replacement, which is drink a full glass of water.
So you're linking the bad trigger, which is the counter, to a new positive ending. Hydration.
Exactly. And finally, the nemesis of phase 1 productivity, hitting the snooze button.
Ugh, the worst.
The moment you hit snooze, you've done the bad habit. The immediate low LF replacement should be something physical and brief. Perform 1 minute of simple physical stretches or movements right there in bed. It's easy, it's positive, and it starts to associate that bad action with a new beneficial motor sequence.
And the criteria for the replacement behavior is really important here. It must be something positive.
And fairly easy to execute. This is crucial. If the replacement is high LF, say, running a mile after hitting snooze, you will struggle to insert it on top of the initial slip, and the entire intervention will just collapse. It has to be a low-effort positive action that helps you successfully complete the new, desired double habit loop.
This has been an incredibly detailed deep dive. We started with that shopping 70% statistic, and then we built this foundational toolkit for biological change.
Yeah, we defined limbic friction as the true metric for effort. We identified linchpin habits that use affinity to trigger those positive cascades.
We explored task bracketing to establish neural fingerprints and provided the 24-hour phase system for strategic scheduling.
And finally, we gave you that powerful post-slip intervention for using your bad habits against themselves.
And all of these tools are firmly rooted in the biology of neuroplasticity. We have shown that habit mastery is not about endlessly applying brute force willpower.
So what does this all mean for you, the person listening?
I think the most profound understanding from all this is that true habit mastery is achieved not through continuous conscious struggle,
But by strategically applying maximum effort at the right biological moment, specifically during phase 1, high activation, and then intentionally shifting your internal state and your environment in phases 2 and 3 to allow your brain to do the essential heavy lifting of consolidation while you sleep.
You now have the scientific framework to measure the effort required, which is limbic friction, and to optimize the timing, which is the phase system.
The knowledge is here. You can measure the resistance and you can optimize the timing.
So what is the single hardest habit you will now measure, schedule, and strategically place into your phase 1 tomorrow? That decision, made strategically and anchored to your own biology, is the first step toward lasting biological change.